Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore concepts that allow us to broaden our view of the world. You'll hear interesting topics, meet fascinating guests, and discover who you really are. Using the time-tested practices of astrology, you'll learn how to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Astrology, art, and spiritual adventure on Turning of the Wheel TV with Chris Flisher. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name's Chris Flisher. As you know, this is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. And today we're going to be talking about a very interesting topic about reincarnation and how it fits into how astrology and reincarnation are related, interrelated, and just the concept of reincarnation as an overall topic. My guest today is Joseph Crane. He's an old friend of mine from the Astrology Institute, and that's his website, astrologyinstitute.com. And we're going to be talking about this. So Joseph, when we think about the term, it's a big topic, I know, it's like, wow, there's an elephant in the room here. The idea of reincarnation. Many different religions believe in it. Many religions have a different view of what it is. Mm-hmm. And yet, it's a fascinating topic that none of us can really speak to without any sort of experience, unless we've had some sort of a
we've all had experience, but we just don't remember it.
We just don't remember it, yeah. And so that's an interesting concept in itself. Why don't you give us some background on the idea, just some sort of overarching themes about reincarnation?
Well, reincarnation literally means a new body, and people will also use the word rebirth instead of reincarnation. And it's been around in the West more from the philosophy side of things, and the East it was both part of philosophy and religion. And the background is mostly in the East, and there are a few different versions, but they have in common the idea that from lifetime to lifetime, we are in the wheel of samsara, the wheel of becoming. And we can go round and round and round and round until we establish some kind of divinity within ourselves. Or from a Buddhist point of view, we become reborn consciously as a means to serve others. In the West, it was sort of under the surface. It became better known in the 19th century from the Theosophical movement, where it was wedded to a very strongly Western idea of evolution and progress, that Helene Blavatsky and others were influenced not only by the spiritual legacy from India, but also by Darwinism. And the idea that as a species, we have evolved from lower functioning to higher functioning, so why not continue from lifetime to lifetime? It
almost seems as if there would be a cumulative sort of effect to that.
I think that's basically been the idea.
Yeah, sort of like, version 2.0. And as you come back again, you are imbued with a new sense of characteristics. As humankind evolves, we have more information from which to draw. We have, obviously, we come preloaded with more information. Each generation going forward is...
And as we talked last time, what does the universe want from us? What do we want from ourselves? What is our sense of calling? So what the reincarnational astrologers have done is tacked on the idea of reincarnation. What is our assignment for this lifetime? What are the residues from the previous lifetimes? What's the trajectory toward what's coming up?
Right. And the astrology chart, when cast, presents that information in a way that is manifested through the nodes and sort of that characteristic of the chart where we see the north and the south nodes representing perhaps the past and the future.
That's one possibility.
One possibility.
The nodes were not used in that way until the 20th century, and it began used more psychologically, that the south node of the moon would represent your habitual patterns, your comfort zone, that which is easy, that which is like eating Doritos and watching bad television where it's sort of pleasant, but it's not very interesting.
Right.
Whereas a north node can be unpleasant, much more interesting,
Yeah.
and is more of a path of growth. So what happens subsequently in the last decades of the century is let's attach a spiritual significance to the lunar nodes. And so the south node represents previous incarnations of what the leftovers are, the unlearned lessons. The north node is more where you're going. And that's one possibility. The other that Indian astrologers use is, well, what part of the chart isn't karma?
That's true. I mean, you would think that's a good point. I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be pointed out by just one particular placement of one particular data point.
And there are several books that will look at, oh, my sun in Capricorn, my Venus in Scorpio conjunct Saturn ruling my ascendant, and all these little factors as, okay, what does this mean for you spiritually? Mm-hmm. That maybe Venus conjunct Saturn in Scorpio means some kind of bad sexual activity in a previous lifetime, and I'm here to correct it now. That sort of thing.
Right. And do you think that the idea of, I mean, I have a firm belief, I mean, when we look at the areas you're talking about with Vedic astrology would be Rahu, Ketu, the
yes.
dragon's head, the dragon's tail,
mm-hmm.
the sort of the idea of the past and the present through their mythological as well as their spiritual practices mm-hmm. has that quality. And when you look at a person's chart and you find those particular mm-hmm. data points in the chart, there is a certain resonance there, I find, in my own personal chart that seems as if it is likely that I did leave a certain past life.
And the nodes are, using the nodes in that way is very clear and very easy. Mm-hmm. That I have South Node in Cancer in the 10th house. So I'm, my North Node is more Capricorn, 4th house. I should be a more contemplative, serious person this time around.
Although you are.
So I'm doing well.
It is an interesting, and the thing is that so many different religions sort of tiptoe around the idea of astrology and the idea of reincarnation, and yet reincarnation is very much a part of many world religions. There are significant, bodies of people who subscribe to it and believe that this is and it's sort of like, do your job well this time. So, I mean, even Christianity, do mm-hmm. well, you're going to hell or you're going to heaven. Mm-hmm. That whole concept there.
Right, of realms of the afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
Although I think the Catholics may decide that purgatory doesn't exist. I heard that somewhere.
No.
Which I think would be terrible.
Oh.
Because, because we're all of mixed character.
Right.
In terms of the scale of good and bad deeds
right.
in any particular lifetime.
Mm. But I mean, I do think there's a definite focus there. There's an idea that, and I think people would recognize that they would feel they'd be compelled towards a certain area. You'd be compelled towards an area of life based on where your chart was, obviously getting back to astrology, by the direction of the nodes and where they were in the chart and how they would relate to reincarnation. How does the ability do our collective memories contain things when we talk about deja vu, as if we've been there before? Is that a reflection of a former life? Is that just a weird anomaly? I mean, how do you think that sounds?
That's a large question.
Yes, well, you're contemplative.
I'm contemplative and can juggle a few concepts at once. It's interesting. I teach this course for Kepler College on astrology and incarnation. One thing I enjoy doing is I give an assignment of what were your last 4 lifetimes?
Last 4, wow.
Last 4 lifetimes, not just last lifetime. Look at your chart, look at the circumstances of your life, make it into a story. Mm-hmm. Maybe you have some kind of intuitive hit, and partly I did. So I wrote some things that I sort of had a strong feeling about, had a strong feeling about in the past. And sometimes it's pure speculation, but you learn a lot about yourself that way.
Interesting. What were the areas that you were looking at to find those 4 past lives?
I was looking at, I didn't use the nodes. I looked at basic aspect configurations in my chart. I looked at my strong Jupiter and Cancer in the 10th, and imagined myself being like a priest in Mexico, totally aghast at the cooperation of the church with the ruling classes.
Interesting.
And I looked at Venus and Venus conjunct Saturn and Scorpio, and said, oh, housewife in Italy, cheated on husband, got knocked off.
Ah, interesting.
And I looked at my history with alcoholism. And I said, last time, teenager, killed by a drunken driving father.
Okay.
That sort of thing.
Yeah, so you were able to extract stories from your
my chart.
From your chart.
And a little bit from my life as well.
But as a concept, and that's an interesting practice, and I think that there's such a thing as past life regression, which is, can put you into a different space where you would tend to go back, retrieving memories of things that seem familiar. I've done that myself, and it has been very enlightening, and I think very familiar. I felt very familiar in some of these different places that I went. That's the word I would use.
Yeah, they tend to loosen up our attachment to this version of ourselves.
And there's a certain sense of optimism. It's like, gee, we're not done yet. We have another whole chapter to go through. we can come back and do it again. If you didn't get it right this time, you'll go back and do it again.
Maybe.
Maybe. But
we
there's
may have
also,
to do it again as a Cocker Spaniel.
Right. There's also the idea when we speak of samsara and sort of the Buddhist wheel of cycle of life, that there does come a point in time when you would be outside of that circle. So this is not a continuum. It does reach a certain point where it comes to an end. You do ascend, or is that simply a...
Oh, no. I think in most of the religions of India that talk about samsara as a wheel of rebirth, there is the possibility of individual salvation, of not turning the wheel but getting out of it. There's also in the Buddhist religion there's that possibility for sure, but also a decision to come back and keep working intentionally. It's similar to, we talk about lucid dreaming sometimes, and most of our dreams are ignorant and sort of we're being played around by circumstances happening in our brain. Whereas intentional dreaming is we take over the process and we transform our dreams into things that are different. And we can do that with lifetimes. Instead of compulsively just doing our next lifetime based upon the karma that we've accumulated in the past, we can say, okay, next time around.
Right. And
that's that whole Tibetan tradition of tulkus, or reincarnate lamas, like the Dalai Lama.
Right. But the idea of having a chance to come back and perhaps do it again.
A mulligan.
Yeah, really, a mulligan.
Many of our lifetimes need a mulligan.
Come back and do it again implies also the idea that we would, you would assume that if you had a bad life in one life, you would come back and have the inverse of that, and you sort of as a reward for suffering the hardship of the past life, and that's the whole idea of karma. People refer to karma as, well, you do something bad this life, you're going to pay for it in the next. That concept of reincarnation is interesting in that regard as well.
But Chris, we are actually, as Westerners, we tend to be more narrow than in the East. Think of a gazillion previous lifetimes. Karma does not come simply from a previous lifetime. It may come from way back when. That just finds its occasion. That, for instance, when I was in high school and college, I learned some German. For decades, I haven't had any opportunity to work on German. However, maybe next year I'll go to Germany. It just happens to happen then, even though it may be a fruition of like something that was decades before.
Right.
So karma can work that way. And it, depending on the conditions of a rebirth, different karma will ripen.
Do you think that people who have a particular affinity for, they come to this earth, people who are rich, powerful, or at least, powerfully influential people.
Sure.
Whoever that may be, whether it's a singer or an actor or politician, whatever. Do you think that they have a sense, is their karmic duty to fulfill that role? The new role of that person? Were they destined for that? I mean, we can see that sometimes in the astrology chart if we
Absolutely.
we can manipulate, or not manipulate, we can digest and interpolate.
And also leaders and public figures and famous musicians, they're not all the same way. That people are leaders in different ways. And
in different signs.
Absolutely.
There's no set formula that says if you're born with this, this, and this, that you're going to be that.
Right.
Right.
And so the qualities of your leadership may be determined partly by the astrological chart. The fact that you are a leader may also be indicated. But as we both know, people have ups and downs during their lifetime.
Right.
And
circumstance.
You're running for president, and then you quit, and nobody hears of you.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And that is very much of a cycle, a sort of a moment in time when someone is destined to be in the spotlight for a period of time. Perhaps that was a moment of time, and so how they come out of that. You think that's a manifest destiny, sort of? Let's take that perfect example. Someone who's risen up through the ranks, becomes well known in a national political scene. All of a sudden, they're nobody again.
Right.
We've got numerous examples of that. Would you see that as something that that person made a choice? Was that free will imposed on them, or circumstance?
It's got to be a combination, because
we all come to that juncture.
We all come to that juncture, and most people in the center of political life want to stay there. They want to go out with a win, not a loss.
They want to go out. They want to go down in history.
Right. They want to be like the quarterback for the Denver Broncos.
Right.
I won the Super Bowl and I can retire. But it's not true for most of us. Most of us, our streak has run.
Or has not arrived yet.
Or maybe has not arrived yet. It will come back.
One of the analogies I often use when I think about this sort of conundrum is the analogy of a cuckoo clock. And I think of a cuckoo clock with lots of little wheels spinning around, all at different revolutions. We've got big wheels, we've got small wheels, and they're all operating at different cycles. And there comes a point in time when they click and the bird comes out and the bird has arrived, so to speak, right?
Yes.
And we see this with people, we can see this with people as diverse as Michael Jackson. He's 5 years old, he's on the stage of Ed Sullivan, dancing away, wow, his star is shining bright. The other extreme might be someone like a George Bernard Shaw, 94 years old, he finally gets his first book published at 94. Now, those are opposite ends of the spectrum, and there's plenty of people in between all that. But that would be sort of a representation of that point in time where there was a karmic debt, perhaps, or not a karmic debt, a karmic calling that brought them to that spot in time based on their chart and sort of the external circumstances.
And sometimes previous good karma runs out. It's finite. And people often look at karma as in terms of debt and in terms of assets.
Right.
And you use it up. And I think of one current presidential candidate who is riding very high, and he's got really nice transits right now. But what's going to happen when those transits are no longer happening?
Exactly. That's where timing comes in. See, timing really is, and this is where a good qualified astrologer can really help people when it comes to timing, because you got to know when to hold and you got to know when to fold. I mean, that's really what it comes down to in some ways. It is about being at the right place in the right time. And I've had clients who've come to me and with wonderful transits going on, and they just lost their job and they have wonderful transits, and I say, well, what are you doing? Oh, I'm sitting at home watching TV. I say, why aren't you getting a new haircut? Why aren't you getting your resume done? Why aren't you out there on the path? You've got a great opportunity to be there. So some of that is we know that the potential's there, and some people have that potential, and it's a good time to strike. I do believe that if you are in the right pocket of time, and you act accordingly through the knowledge of an astrologer, objective view, such as yourself, you can get that objectivity and know that it's a good time to act.
Right.
Or
That
not
happens
to
a
act.
lot. Okay,
Yeah.
you get laid off. Okay, take 2 weeks off.
And get right back out there.
Get right back out there, but take 2 weeks off. Forget about the headhunters. Forget about the other people. Go to the beach. Ride your bike. Read War and Peace. Whatever it is.
Because what's happened is that point, the energy is on the career. The energy is on the career. So we
At
know
that point,
yes, we know that career energy is there, so therefore it's time to strike. How that manifests can come down on either side of the coin.
Right. And the same thing we can operate within a given period of time can happen over multiple lifetimes. Sometimes one lifetime, a particular lifetime, is that which you have to do something specifically active or public or historical or important. Sometimes maybe not so much. You know, perhaps a lifetime is made for contemplation and for appreciation of nature or art.
Or infinite servitude.
Absolutely.
It can be any number of the things. It can be, you could be born the poorest person in the world, living in in a shack someplace, and that is your quality of life.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting, you know, many modern astrologers use reincarnation as part of their astrology, and it's very much focused on, you know, what I'm going to learn and what my last lifetime and what my next lifetime is like. But previous people, like, I mean, Dane Rudyard to some extent, but somebody like Alice Bailey especially, the whole thing was linked to some kind of who are you in a world transition? Who are you in terms of what's happening historically, in terms of some kind of global spiritual evolution? And later that became the whole Age of Aquarius thing. And it's interesting that that whole concept of participating in a larger historical epoch has pretty much faded. They were much more interested in incarnation almost as an extension of psychological growth.
So what you're referring to is being born into a tribe at a point in time that has a specific set of goals or a specific, I think that's very accurate.
Yeah.
I think that the generations are dictated by the outer planets, as we know. We see these longer term trends. People born within a range of time are going to have distinct characteristics that were manifested through the correlationship of the planets at the time, such as the 60s generation with the Virgo, you know, the Pluto-Uranus conjunction in Virgo. That brought about that fervent explosion of creativity and a massive departure of all norms, and which I would like to see. You know, I actually thought at that time that we were headed in the right direction. It seemed as if we were going down the right path, and yet we have sort of come to a spot where now we see those two planets in a square to each other, and we're seeing revolution of a different kind. And it's interesting.
Devolution.
Devolution, devolution, yes, it's exactly. Because the squares obviously form a different type of energy than we get with the conjunction, where as opposed to getting a combined thrust of energy and impulse and influence of the two planetary attributes, we get a diffusion, or even a construct, a sort of a collision of the two. And even though the results may be revolutionary, they are revolutionary in different ways, perhaps, which we're seeing. Which brings us back to the idea of reincarnation. As so, would you think that people, or you think generations are, would you think generations would be reincarnated as a group again, another tribe brought in in that capacity?
That's a good question. Sure.
I mean, you would think so.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
With certain.
And you know, there's some speculation that the baby boomer generation was born after World War II.
Right.
These are an incarnated people, a group of people who died during the war. And they have a different agenda. They have an interest in not being seduced by institutions. They're much more individualistic.
Much more so. I mean, that would make sense. It would be a natural follow-on. It's sort of the grand pendulum of life swinging from one extreme to the other in those characteristics. Because, you know, if you look at any generation, that clearly was a departure from the generation before. It would have to be that generation.
For sure.
And there hasn't really been a social, cultural revolution like that since, to be honest,
Right.
to that extent.
There have been attempts.
There's been attempts.
I mean, the Uranus-Pluto square, it's very interesting to trace it, because at the beginning of the square, maybe a year before, was Rachel Carson's Silent Spring.
Right.
Now we have at the square the Paris Accords of last December, where the entire globe agreed on climate change and reducing carbon emissions.
So we see the parallels there. We see the parallels there. And you know, I mean, in some ways, the conjunction of Uranus and Pluto in the 60s brought about this radical shift in society and culture and mores and everything else. And the offspring of that generation are now faced with they're the sort of the millennial generation that are faced with this Pluto-Uranus square, which is much different, as we mentioned. And here we are in the situation where we see sort of a revolution of sorts taking place as...
Well, the tail end of the conjunction back in the 60s was the great Cultural Revolution in China.
Right, as well, same thing.
So, and we're getting ISIS this time around.
Much different flavor.
Yes.
Much different flavor. And that idea of reincarnation, you know, it has its roots in these old philosophical, religious establishments where we see that idea manifest itself clearly and brought about. But I think the astrology chart has great wisdom in it, and it allows us to see the potential there.
Yes. It allows us to see both the debts that we have incurred, that we are working on, and also how we can gain in this lifetime. And maybe even information about how to transcend.
Right.
Maybe.
Maybe. Well, it's a balance sheet of assets and liabilities, I think.
Yes.
And we have to address that. And I think the way to address it is to, you know, play up your attributes, your assets, work with your assets, and try to repair your liabilities, or at least try to redirect them in a positive way. I think that's the best thing to think about it in that regard.
Yeah, and there's a famous Buddhist line that if you want to know your previous lifetimes, look at your environment now. If you want to know your next lifetimes, look at what you're doing now.
So how does that translate? Can you just elaborate on that?
Well, it means that we've been talking earlier about necessity and the fact that we all live in determinate environments, that we are all subject to limitations. Some of them are external, some of them are internal. Some of them are simply physical because we have a body. So we have some idea, and our environment will tell us, and our bodies will tell us sort of what we have to work on, what we have to repair, let's say, what we have to purify. At the same time, we have the ability to do well in this lifetime, to play well the cards we're dealt, to become more realized.
Interesting. It's a fascinating subject. We could go on for hours. Reincarnation in itself is a topic that has mystified man since the time began, but we have a short time. Perhaps we'll pick up the topic again sometime.
At least next lifetime.
Next lifetime. Thank you again, Joseph, for coming on.